Good evening. My name is George Wilson. I'm living in New Hampshire, Durham, New Hampshire, at what they call a continual care retirement community. The title of my show here, which I will be demonstrating to you, is called Turkish Days, Arabian Nights. Just to give you a little background of my career, I'll start when I graduated from college. I went to school in Ohio. I was raised in central Illinois. My senior year, I was looking for a job. My father was a doctor of nutrition at a research farm. He said he could find me a summer job. It was the worst job I've ever had in my life. My responsibility was to climb under chicken houses that were about 3 feet high and pull out the dead roosters. There were 40 chicken houses that I had to go into every day. And if you've ever been in Illinois in August, it was a very hot job. Anyway, I then joined the Army. And while I was in the Army at basic training, my father called me and said that the Peace Corps was offering a test and did I want to take it. So I took a test, and in their requirements, they asked me about my work experience, and I said I had worked on a poultry farm, and then later they blew it up and said I was a specialist in poultry horticulture, which I really didn't know much about poultry. Anyway, I then took training with the Peace Corps in Puerto Rico and learning Spanish, and I was assigned to go to Colombia. And when I was there, they asked me what part of Colombia, because Colombia is a large company, has mountains and beautiful beaches, and I said I wanted to be in a warm area. So they placed me in a very small town outside of Cartagena. Very primitive town, no water, no electricity. They had one little school. I spent 2 years there actually by myself. My partner actually was going to live with me, but he got sick, never came back. After 2 years, working under the jurisdiction of CARE, meaning Care Agency in New York City, they were supervising us. They asked me if I wanted to come to New York and interview for a job. So I went, and then they said they had a job in Chile, and I should go home, pack up, and come back. So my wife and I, actually it wasn't my wife, it was my fiance, and I moved to Chile. We got married in Chile, and within a month there, they reposted me in the most southern part of Chile, which was called Concepcion. Very shortly after we got our apartment all set up, they told me, the CARE people wanted me to go to Washington to interview for a job. Would I hurry up? So we got on a jet, flew all night. When we got to New York, they said, don't bother getting on a train, take a helicopter. We had to go up top of a building, took a helicopter to Washington. Made me feel like a vice president. So I had to interview with two people, one being Sarge Driver, who I think you all know, he was married to Eunice Kennedy. And the other one was the niece of President
Carter.
Yeah, Johnson. This was during the war on poverty. So I had the interview with Driver, and it went very well. He was very relaxed and went on for about 30 minutes. And then I moved on to the niece and sat down. She was late, so I had a coat on with a little pin, in my lapel. And she finally came in. She never said a word, and I just stared at her. I thought, she's interviewing me. I'm not interviewing her. Finally, she said, take that pin out of your lapel. I thought, so I did it. And she asked me very irregular questions. And I thought, well, I'm going to flunk this interview because I wasn't very impressed with her. But I did, so I got the job, and they flew us to Ankara, Turkey. The job was to supervise about 50 volunteers that were working in rural communities. They were spread out all over Turkey. I had a Jeep, and I took half of Turkey. I had up along the Black Sea, all the way over bordering Russia, down to Syria. And my job was mainly to monitor how they were doing in that community. So while I was there, I noticed there were a lot of shops in towns that were hammering copper. And I would go in and watch what were they doing, and they would take off the tin kind of over the copper and then shine it up. And I don't know, I was just enamored by it. So I would buy various pieces. And then when I would go out to the villages, the Peace Corps volunteers would announce that if they had anything they might want to sell. So I bought various pieces of copper there. So continuing on, after I finished my 2 years working with CARE in Ankara, I decided I would go on to graduate school and went back to the States. And then I got a wonderful job in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, which is the atomic city in Tennessee. And the job there was to train unemployable, poor people, a lot of them were not high school graduates, in technical skills in the nuclear field. It was a wonderful job because the people that taught them were actually workers themselves. And we placed close to 85% of these students. After 5 years of that job, I happened to look in a journal and I saw an ad advertising for someone that wanted to work in industrial training in Beirut, Lebanon. And I thought, oh, that sounds like an interesting job. So I filled a resume. And about a month later, I got a call from a gentleman from London. And he said he was coming over to Oak Ridge, Tennessee to interview me. I thought, oh, boy. You know, I wasn't really that serious about a job there. So he came, and he was actually a priest. He stayed with us one night interviewing, but he said, I want to tell you and your wife, the job is not in Lebanon, but it's in Saudi Arabia. Now, this was in 1974. So we thought it over. I had a son. I thought, well, it might be hard to take him to a foreign country, but we sold our house, flew over there. Now, the job there was, I was a contractor with Saudi Arabia Oil Company, and that was in Dhahran, so on the east coast of Saudi Arabia. It was a fascinating job. I was to train and select supervisors that had management potential. So I worked with a group of 30 Saudis for a whole year. So at that time, I got to know the Saudi Arabians and was fascinated with their architecture and their handicrafts. So at this time, I want to take you and show you what I have collected in my apartment. And the management here asked me to show it to all the residents here. So we'll go down and look at these various objects that I have. We are now in the gallery here, and you'll see part of our display. And then after this showing, I will go individually and explain each item. We're going to start with this plate here. It's a plate from Kütahya, Turkey. It's a famous place, a mine. They have mines with gold. But what I wanted to show to you is the various designs in the plate, because as you probably know, Muslims do not draw the human body or the face. All their artwork is done like this. And below now is a copper, what I call, it's a food carrier. It's a 3-layered canteen. Up above, of course, with soup, and then rice, and then maybe a dessert. The spoons would be unscrewed, and then they would use those spoons to eat with. I especially liked it because a lot of the Turkish copper, they have ish, they call it ish, meaning it's little detailed work, carvings that are done on the copper. So moving on here, we have a top of a candy dish. Again, it has a lot of ish and engravings kind of thing, copper, and then there is some silver. See, a lot of them, the copper had this sort of silver, I think it was either tin or something like that, that kind of, you get a contrast. Then we had a funnel. People asked me why I put that in. I traveled all over Turkey. There were not gas stations. So you'd have to have jerry cans. When you're getting low on gasoline, you'd use this to pour the gasoline into your car. Our next, this is my prize piece here, mainly because I don't know what it is. I'm not even sure why I bought it, but it's from Turkey. It has a lot of fancy things, of Islamic things. Down here, they had 2 that match and 1 tap that is totally from the 20th century. How, I don't know what happened, but they redid that. I think it might have been one of 2 things, either used in front of a mosque. You know, the Muslims always wash their hands and feet. They had maybe soap dishes up there. Inside was water. Somebody else told me, no, it's a Turkish coffee and tea maker. They put it on coals and heat the water. Up above, they put the little glasses where they drink tea. So I really don't know which way it is. Another piece that I bought because it was so ornate, you know, in Turkey they don't, especially in the villages, now this is in the 1970s, in the rural areas, they didn't have bath or running water. So the people would go maybe once a week to the Turkish baths. This is what they call a soap carrier. If you open it up, the very bottom has little fancy holes where the water can fall off the soap so you don't get a gooey piece of soap. Moving on here at the very top, this is a top to a water jug. I don't actually have the jug, but I have the top. Again, you see it has that ish at the very bottom, very detailed Islamic kind of thing. This is a water jug that you find in what we call latrines. They didn't actually have latrines. The Turkish people always in the villages lived over the animals. They lived on the 2nd floor. Their bathroom was just a kind of a closet with a hole, and you had this for cleansing yourself. Okay, moving on. I have one other show here that I want to tell you a few things. If you come over here, you can see a picture of my son and me back in the 70s. We both were given these robes, and there's a funny story because I worked with these gentlemen day and night, I should say. One of them was called, I never forget, he was Ali Bhutan. He had beautiful robes. And I broke a rule that I knew I shouldn't. I complimented him. You should never really compliment somebody because they feel obligated to give something to you. I just totally forgot. So he said, oh, George, he says, I'll pick you up in the morning, get your son, pick me up in a Mercedes. We went to his tailor and got the whole thing for myself and my son. And I've had it for 55 years. The woman can't see much of her, but the women were not allowed, back in the 74s, were not allowed to go out on their own. They'd stay behind walls. If they wanted to go shopping, they had to go with a husband or an uncle. And I was always told, if you see the woman in her dress like that, don't look at her or don't ask her husband, how's your family, and look at the wife. Supposedly they think you're interested in the woman. I don't know who would be interested in her, but I don't know today. I think the veils are much different, but they still are required to cover their head. Now we're moving over here. Again, this is from Saudi Arabia. This is what they call Bedouin jewelry. I started buying this because I just liked it, and it was very crude. And the Bedouins in Saudi Arabia now are sort of disappearing. It's sort of like our indigenous people. And the jewelry is very crude. This one over here with the turquoise was called, they would have their Quran stuffed in there, writing in the Quran. My wife used it as her own jewelry. And over here is a picture of us. Like some people said, George, did you actually wear the robes? And your wife, did she wear the abaya? Generally, I was told if I was invited to a men's party, of course, women weren't invited to the parties, that I should wear what would they call the thobe. So I always wore it to parties, but I never wore it to work. My wife very seldom wore the abaya, but I think the outfits are really something to remember. And there is a continuation of the jewelry. Again, they used a lot of turquoise, earrings, necklace. I don't think there's a lot of value to this, but to me it gives me a real feeling of what Saudi Arabia was like with the royal people. This is a continuation of items from Saudi Arabia. This is called a saddle bag or camel bag that they would put over a camel and carry their produce inside both of these pouches. It's kind of interesting because they have pieces of rug added to it. It doesn't really match. I bought it because I thought it would make a wonderful pillow. And when I was in my regular home, I would stuff it with cotton, put it on the floor. One part was on the floor, the other was against the wall, and you could sit very comfortably. Now I'm going to show you a picture of what Jeddah, this is the biggest city in Saudi Arabia on the coast, and the reason I wanted you to see this is the wood over the windows. That when I was there, the Saudi Arabia was trying to become very westernized, so they asked everybody that owned these kind of apartments to pull all that wood off and look more Western. And so they just threw it on the road. I drove by, found all kinds of pieces like this. I picked one up. I had another one that was a door, but I don't have it here. The purpose of this design is that the Saudi women could be behind looking outside whatever's going on, and the men could not see the women. Again, you see the Arabic motifs here. I think these were originally made by Turks. Okay. Now this is Bukhara design prayer rug. It's all wool. And this is at the time when I was living in a town called Dammam, Saudi Arabia. And it was during the Hajj. And when they say the Hajj, this is when all the Muslims would come to Saudi Arabia to go to Mecca, thousands of them. And there was this little guy that had this thing rolled up on his back, and I said to him, "Oh, show me the carpet or something." And he said he wanted to sell it to pay for his trip. And I really liked it. I love the colors. I've had it for 55 years. I usually have it on the floor. I think it's almost too pretty to put on the floor. I'm gonna put it on the wall. I paid $200 for it, which I thought was a bargain. Now this is a coffee maker that I got in a town very close to Russia. A gentleman brought it out, and it's not copper, but it's bronze. And they would put the hot coals in here, the hot water and the coffee would come out, and they'd open it up and make coffee out of it. It's stamped. Most of these are stamps. They have contests, which is the prettiest one. It's called the samovar. That's it. These are the last two pieces of our display. I want to talk about what they call a serving plate. It's a copper tray, and I bought it mainly because, again, of the ish all around the work. And I bought this in Istanbul. I didn't really buy much in Istanbul because they were usually more expensive, but I thought it was so attractive. When I got it home, I showed it to somebody that seemed to know items, and he said, well, it's really Armenian. And on the back, there's a date that says 7/16. I have no idea what that means of age-wise. But in Saudi, almost all the people, especially in the rural area, if they were going to have a meal, they boil a lamb or a goat, put it in the middle, and put rice all around it, and they put it on the floor. You sit cross-legged and eat with your fingers. If you're a guest, they always said, there's the eyeball. You get the eyeball. I did, but I didn't really like it too much. But anyway, this is one of my, I use this as a coffee tray, in my house now. Down below is what is called a Kuwait box. It opens up, and again you have all this kind of funny-ish. Why they call it a Kuwait, I think there was more wood crafts in Kuwait, but there's drawers. Each drawer opens up. I put my playing cards in there. It's very heavy. The Arab women usually always got a chest like this, and they put their dresses and gifts that they get for a wedding, and that's what they would use it for. I have since I don't have it on now, but I bought a piece of glass to cover it because there is some water stains in it, but I like it. Thank you for coming.